will directly dive into the topic and most probably repeat some of the stuff that Andy mentioned here today. And we'll go into the topic of last year, the famous TVOS wars, right? Out of those 17, 18, 20, whatever the real number is, OSs, who will be the one that will stand out and win the race? And in our opinion, as the slide already indicates, it will be most probably one of those independents. So we are currently in the golden age of TV. We are, as we all know, transitioning more and more to streaming. Apologies. And we have an abundance, a huge amount of CTVOSs, as we mentioned, which all cause the unbundling problem. More and more consumers have a problem of finding the right content, the entertaining content that they were looking for on the smart TVs. But who are those 17, 18, 20 players in our opinion? There is 3 main categories that we think about. Number one are the so-called walled gardens, right? The OSs that naturally or historically belong to TV brands. Just as a few examples here, Samsung with Tizen, Hisense with Vida, LG with webOS. Then there are the so-called tech brands, brands that have historically no real hardware business, no consumer electronic business at all, but who are pretty good in what they're doing in terms of OS and user experience and software generation, companies like Amazon's Fire, Roku, and Alphabet's Google TV. And then there are the independent players. You mentioned a newcomer, Titan OS. We know TiVo and ourselves, whaleOS, in combination of Mission One, which I will explain further down the road. But before I go into the topic and share with you of why we think an independent OS will make the race, allow me to quickly explain who we are and what we have been doing since our inception in 2011. We have always concentrated on TV and TV streaming. This has been our core business, and this is what we do now, as I mentioned, since 2011, making us one of the very first OS providers actually in the industry. Now, as a header I used here, and thank you very much for underlining it one more time, Andy, because you didn't put us on the slide, or Thierry. We are probably one of the best kept secrets in our industry. Why? This has mainly to do with the way of how we did our business the initial 10 years. We were white labeling our solution. So customers like Vestel, Sharp, Philips, or TCL, Skyworth, all of them either globally or regionally or in a certain specific country were using our solution under their own brand. We have a pretty global footprint nowadays with offices in Europe and Latin America, and very soon we are also establishing a great new business in the United States, which is not official yet, but it's coming soon to the industry. So what do we offer? We offer 2 main products in our portfolio. We offer our whaleOS, which is currently powering hundreds of brands worldwide, which is, in our opinion, a true independent TV OS, mainly because of 2 reasons. Number one is we do not compete with any hardware in the retail space. So most of the OSs that I mentioned that were under the group of the TV brands, such as Samsung, for example, carve out their OS to give it to other brands, but at the same time compete with those brands in the retail space with the Samsung brand. And I have the fundamental belief, and we as an organization, that if you want to be truly independent, you should not and cannot compete with your partners on the retail space. In addition to that, we have created our own AVOD fast service. Some of you may be familiar with it from the industry. We are already publishing for 2.5 years on multiple OSs out there and are currently available in 27 countries with our offering. Now, coming back to the question, why do we believe an independent OS will make the race as one of the winners? I don't think there will be a single winner in this war, but I think there will be also an independent OS who will stand out. First thing, and you mentioned that in the initial discussion, again, Andy, the industry is run, or let me put it this way, 40% of each market, more or less, belongs to these local brands, right? We call them the Vizios of the world. So we have Vizio in the United States, but there is at least 1, 2, 3 Vizios in each and every country. So in Brazil, there is a company called Philco or SEMP, that are the local heroes in these markets. And most of these companies are actually run by traders by heart. They have either founded the company or they know what they're doing. They run the company for over 15, 20 years and have very good relation into the distribution channels. And traders rely on relationships. And for us, this is most of the time underestimated, is the relationship that a player has to form with the local partner in order to win their trust, because traders like to go back to people they trust and they work with for over 10, 15, 20 years if possible. Even the best trust in the world, though, does not work if your product is not good enough. So an independent OS needs to offer a great consumer experience, no matter the trust level with the TV brands. Why? Because people or end consumers are used to an easy user interface, smooth transaction on the device, similar to the great design that Roku is actually doing, in my opinion, or Google is working on. Extensive content selection is another point that's a no-brainer. I think I don't have to explain that. If you don't have the content for that specific market, you're out of the market. You must carry the must-carries, of course, but there is so many local applications out there that you need to carry on your solution if you want to be successful on a global scale. But then the last 2 points that are, in my opinion, very important is you have to be cost leader. Because if you're an independent OS, and if you compete against giants like Google, for instance, let me use that example again, you will always start 1-0 behind if you compare it to a football match. Why? Because Google has a brand awareness at the end consumer level. So they don't have to convince the end consumer in the shop floor to be bought. An independent OS has to convince the TV brands to work together, but it also somehow has to convince the end consumer to work together. And most of the time, in most markets, it's price. So you have to be cost leader with your solution on the BOM level to allow the TV brand to make a higher margin. I think it was Maria who mentioned, like in the panel before, the average profit margin for a TV brand globally is around 1%, sometimes even lower than that with some ODMs. So every dollar, every cent is welcome. And that would then reflect in a lower shelf price, in an ideal case, to compete against Google, Roku, and the likes in the retail space. But the most important part, and the thing that's changing a lot, maybe I would say in the last year or two, is the fact that platforms are starting to share some of their revenues. Now, in the past, we have seen that the bigger tech guys like to incentivize the OEMs. So without naming names now, one of these big tech guys goes to a big OEM in Europe and basically pays them a double-digit dollar amount per TV that they sell to the TV brands on the OEM and ODM level. Now for us, it's going to change. And how are we going to implement that, Andy? That's with Mission 1. So Mission 1 is not an OS. Mission 1 is, oops, I have to go. Our answer and the solution for a harmonious CTV industry. Because what I mentioned before was the missing link in the industry was that everyone wins. Because at some stages throughout the last few years, it was only 1 or 2 of those players that you see here who had a financial benefit from running an OS. Mission 1 was founded to protect the interests of all those participants that you see. Because at the end of the day, we always give the example, we need each other. So a platform needs a hardware, and the hardware needs a platform. It's all intertwined at the moment, and we believe an independent OS in combination with Mission One can actually make sure that TV brands get what they deserve, because at the end of the day, they are the ones that are carrying it into the market. Oops, sorry. Slide has changed. So the idea here is that we collect the revenues through all means of monetization, and we provide a significant share of the monetization back to the TV brands. And by significant, I mean significant, up to 72% of the overall that's been made on our solution, on the independent whaleOS, is possibly given back to the TV brands. This adds an additional revenue stream to those TV brands, something they didn't have because they were relying on this famous 1% hardware trading margin, which is not a sustainable business, as you can imagine, and allow them to concentrate on what they're good at, marketing and sales. So to summarize, because we don't have enough time to go into the different means of monetization, etc., I'm pretty sure you all know that. I want to provide a small overview about what I think an independent OS, like whaleOS, in combination with Mission One, makes different in comparison to the big guys. So first of all, and again I'm echoing off of the previous discussion, it's a fundamental tool to consolidate volume. Every single player alone is simply not big enough to monetize their own platform. Even big OEMs that produce 8, 9, 10 million TVs a year, simply too small in the new world of CTV. As I mentioned, through the revenue sharing mechanism, we create incentives for the TV brands to opt for an independent solution, because with every TV they sell, they get, as I mentioned, up to 70% back from the monetized platform. We create a long-term sustainable mechanism. What do I mean? In the past, it was as follows. If some OS wanted to share some of the revenues with an OS, with an OEM or with a brand, they usually made a one-off payment. So you would go to them and say, okay, you sell, I give you X amount of dollars per TV that you sell, which solved the problem at that certain moment, but which is not sustainable. What Mission One and whaleOS as an independent player is doing, every quarter, basically sending checks. We use the analogy when we go out and meet customers of, we are Robin Hood in a red dress. Robin Hood because we annoy the bigger guys and steal some of the revenues, and the red dress is from Santa Claus. We only give presents. So every quarter, the TV owner gets a check in-house and gets actually paid instead of paying us for the OS itself. And that's a fundamental difference to the actual business that's happening as we speak. As I mentioned, lower cost, the CTVWS needs to offer a winner in costing. Roku is a company who does that quite well, I must say, on the BOM level, very cost efficient. Apologies. But then most of it depends on the memory usage, et cetera, of the device. So you have to be lean, fast, and create still a good user experience. And most importantly, it avoids the dominance of major tech giants and OS independence from device competitors. This is what I meant. It's great. It's a great solution. LG webOS is great. It's very user-friendly. But if I was a TV brand, I would think twice if I would like to carry an OS that is also being used by one of my competitors in shelf space. The whole advantage that I just explained for TV brands is also valid for content providers and publishers, because in the overview I showed you there's multiple stakeholders to this whole ecosystem, and I didn't touch today one of the most important ones, which are the content partners, because it's not part of our discussion today in terms of CTVOS. But what's important to mention is all the advantages that I mentioned before with consolidating and consolidating ad impressions to boost monetization. On top of that, it is a way to offer protection from a few gatekeepers in the market. I agree with what Maria and Andy mentioned before, and Thierry, I think the market will soon shrink and consolidate, but I don't think it will imitate what happened to the mobile industry. I think there will be a few more players left because of the balance. I always say that as long as the Koreans insist on making their own OS this time, which they didn't do on their mobile devices, we still have a chance to coexist together and create not a single or two gatekeepers, but create a pool of 4 or 5 players maybe that are valid options for many, many markets around the globe. So to summarize, a CTVOS that's independent like whaleOS can be one of the winners if they offer a global solution to the worldwide audience. And this means having all the local apps in each and every country, independent of the size of the country. As long as you decide to go into the Netherlands, for example, even it's comparably a small market, you need to make sure that you have NLZ and all these local companies that are being used as a streaming service by the end consumers. As mentioned a few times, you need to be priced competitively. If not, you will have a pretty difficult task ahead of you to compete with giants like Amazon or Roku or Google. You have to deliver a unique user experience and a user interface. The end consumer shouldn't be thinking on how to use a TV. The moment anyone starts thinking about how to use or update an application on a certain TV, in my opinion, that CTVOS is not good enough. And as mentioned again, an independent OS should never ever go into competition in terms of hardware with their partners. You don't want to add additional complexity to your partner's business. You want to remove it, because only if you remove it, they will increase the volume with you, and that would mean that you will increase the total revenues that you can make, and that means everybody makes more money. And last but not least, the money that we make needs to be shared differently. Sharing is caring. That's what we say at Mission One. And we are okay to create a bigger cake and only take up to 30% rather than creating a very small cake and take 100% of this very small cake. So overall, I think an OS that's independent, that thinks about the TV brands as their partners, not as their customers, has a good chance to stand out and be one of the winners of this famous CTV wars. Thank you, guys. Thank you.